This situation stopped being entertainment the moment real-world locations, threats, and weapons entered the conversation. What started as online commentary has escalated into something far more volatile, and the warning signs are no longer subtle. At the center of it are two highly visible internet figures. T.S. Madison, a well-known transgender media personality with a massive platform, and D.L. Whisper, a younger content creator whose brand is built around exposing men he claims are living on the DL or down low. Before we go any further, one thing needs to be clear. This is not about debating sexuality. It is not about who dates whom. And it is not about gossip. This is about escalation, and the moment where online conflict begins to resemble stalking, intimidation, and the potential for irreversible harm. To understand how this got here, we have to slow the story down and separate three different layers that are being dangerously blended together online. Commentary, outing, physical confrontation. They are not the same, and confusing them is how situations spiral. DL Whisperer built his following by positioning himself as a whistleblower. His stated mission is to warn women about men who present publicly as heterosexual while allegedly engaging in same-sex relationships privately. He frames this as protection, particularly in the context of trust, health, and honesty. That framing matters, because it's how his audience is primed to interpret everything that follows. Historically, the concept of men living on the DL has been deeply controversial, especially within Black and LGBTQ+ communities. On one hand, secrecy has been tied to real harm, including partners unknowingly being put at risk for HIV and other STIs. On the other hand, public outing has long been understood as dangerous, unethical, and sometimes deadly. That tension is not new. What is new is the scale, speed, and lack of boundaries enabled by social media. DL Whisperer doesn't limit his commentary to anonymous stories. He names names. He shows faces. He speaks with certainty about allegations that are often impossible for viewers to independently verify, and that alone creates risk, even before the current feud enters the picture. At some point, his content collided with T.S. Madison. The exact origin of their conflict is still unclear, and that uncertainty matters. Online, speculation ranges from alleged shared romantic interests to accusations of disrespect, betrayal, or clout chasing. None of those claims are verified. What is verifiable is what happened next. The conflict became public, then personal, then aggressive. DL Whisperer began repeatedly challenging Madison to physical fights online, openly daring her to fight him. Madison publicly refused, dismissing him as immature and stating she would not engage physically. Up to this point, the situation still lived in the realm of internet drama, hostile, ugly, but contained. Then the line was crossed. DL Whisperer posted video content showing him driving past Madison's home, a mansion on the outskirts of Atlanta, and shared it publicly on Facebook. That is not commentary. That is location exposure. Once someone's home is introduced into a conflict, the stakes change immediately. Homes are not abstract spaces. They are where people sleep, where families live, where security decisions become life or death decisions. And both sides knew that. Madison responded by making it clear she would defend herself if someone showed up at her property. She publicly referenced going to gun ranges and emphasized her right to protect her home. That response wasn't a threat. It was a boundary, and a legal one. And this is where the situation stops being messy and starts being dangerous, because now we have a public feud, repeated invitations to fight, real addresses circulating online, references to weapons and self-defense. That combination is how tragedies begin. The internet often treats escalation like a spectacle. Viewers ask why someone didn't hop out of the car. They frame restraint as cowardice or bluffing, but legally and practically, that thinking is reckless. Showing up at someone's residence to fight is not mutual combat. It is trespass, and depending on jurisdiction and perceived threat, it can legally justify lethal force in self-defense. That's not drama. That's criminal law. What makes this even more volatile is that both parties have massive audiences, and audiences do not behave neutrally. They amplify. They provoke. They pick sides. They dig. And digging is exactly what happened next. In subsequent live streams, Madison and her associates reportedly pulled up DL Whisperer's credit information and personal data. DL Whisperer, in turn, had already exposed Madison's location. Both sides crossed into doxing territory. Once personal, financial, and residential information is public, control is gone. Anyone can show up. Anyone can escalate. Anyone can take words and turn them into action. At that point, it no longer matters who started it. The situation has outgrown its origin, and this is where psychology becomes more relevant than gossip. Public humiliation, identity-based attacks, and perceived threats to safety activate fight-or-flight responses. People stop thinking strategically and start thinking defensively. Every message is read as an attack. Every silence is read as provocation. Add pride. Add audience pressure. Add masculinity politics, transphobia accusations, and community loyalty. This is not a disagreement anymore. It is a powder keg. What makes this particularly alarming is how normalized the escalation has become in commentary spaces. Viewers are entertained by the hostility. They encourage it. They joke about prison as if incarceration is a punchline instead of a permanent life consequence. But prison is not hypothetical. Assault charges are not content. Firearms are not props. And self-defense claims are scrutinized long after the internet moves on. If someone gets hurt here, the same people hyping the feud will disappear, but the legal consequences will not. And there's another layer that cannot be ignored. Outing people, accurately or not, has historically led to violence, suicide, and community backlash. When outing is combined with personal vendettas, it stops being advocacy and becomes weaponization. Even if someone believes DL Whisperer's missions started with good intentions, the current trajectory undermines any claim of protection. Driving past someone's home, issuing fight challenges, and participating in doxing does not protect women. It destabilizes everyone. Likewise, responding with intimidation, firearms rhetoric, and counter-doxing doesn't de-escalate. It signals readiness for conflict. At this point, both sides have lost the moral high ground. And that's the most important thing to say clearly. This is no longer about who is right. It is about preventing something irreversible. Because if this continues on its current path, the outcome won't be a viral clip. It will be a police report. This didn't explode out of nowhere. It followed a pattern we've seen again and again, one that starts with exposure, escalates through audience validation, and ends with people feeling justified doing things they would never do offline. So to understand why this feud is getting dangerous, we have to talk about mechanics, not personalities. Because this isn't just about T.S. Madison or D.L. Whisper. It's about how internet conflict mutates once certain lines are crossed. 1. The call-out loop. Call-out culture runs on a simple loop: accusation, reaction, validation, escalation. At first, the call-out is framed as service. I'm warning people. I'm telling the truth. I'm holding someone accountable. That framing gives the speaker moral permission. But once the audience responds, with views, comments, shares, and praise, the incentive structure changes. The goal stops being truth and starts being engagement. At that point, restraint feels like failure. Backing down looks like weakness. Silence looks like losing. Escalation looks like authenticity. That's the trap. And it's especially dangerous when the content involves identity, sexuality, and reputation, because those things don't reset after a live stream ends. 2. Outing is not neutral information. Outing someone, whether accurate or not, is never neutral. Historically, outing has carried real consequences: loss of employment, family estrangement, violence, mental health crises. That's why even within LGBTQ+ communities, outing has long been treated as ethically fraught, even when people believe secrecy itself is harmful. Now, layer social media on top of that. Outing becomes content. Content becomes currency. Currency becomes power. And power, once tasted, rarely stays contained. When D.L. Whisper moved from anonymous stories to named individuals, then to celebrities, then to public taunts, the risk multiplied. Each step increased the likelihood that someone would feel cornered, humiliated, or threatened. And cornered people do not de-escalate naturally. 3. Audience amplification is not passive. One of the biggest myths about internet drama is that creators are the only actors. They aren't. Audiences escalate conflict constantly, often without realizing it. Comments like, "Pull up then," "You scared," "She wouldn't do nothing," "He deserves it." Those are not jokes in volatile situations. They are permission structures. They tell creators, "You'll be rewarded if this gets uglier." And when someone already feels disrespected or attacked, that encouragement can tip them from restraint into action. This is how spectators become accelerants. 4. Location changes everything. There is a legal and psychological difference between words and proximity. When D.L. Whisper posted footage of driving past Madison's home, the conflict crossed a line that courts and law enforcement take very seriously. Location disclosure does 3 things instantly. It removes anonymity. It introduces physical vulnerability. It forces defensive thinking. At that point, the person whose home is exposed is no longer responding to insults. They're responding to potential danger. That's why Madison's response shifted to self-defense language. Not because she wanted a fight, but because once your home is involved, you have to think in terms of safety, not reputation. This is where people online often get it wrong. They ask, "Why didn't he get out of the car? Why didn't she ignore it?" Because ignoring someone who has publicly shown they know where you live is not de-escalation. It's risk. 5. The firearms reality people don't want to talk about. Once firearms enter the conversation, even rhetorically, the situation is no longer internet drama. In many states, showing up at someone's property after issuing threats or challenges can legally justify defensive force if the homeowner reasonably fears harm. That's not opinion. That's case law, which means fight me rhetoric, location exposure, prior public hostility, all become relevant if something goes wrong. and the internet will not protect anyone from that outcome. 6. Doxing is a point of no return. Once both sides start sharing personal data, addresses, credit information, family details, control is gone. At that point, anyone can intervene, anyone can escalate, anyone can impersonate. The original conflict stops being the main danger. The unknown third party becomes the risk. This is how swatting happens. This is how stalking escalates. This is how innocent people get hurt. And no apology after the fact undoes that. 7. Pride, identity, and the refusal to back down. There's another layer here that makes de-escalation harder. Both sides are now defending more than an argument. They're defending reputation, identity, authority, respect. When pride becomes fused with public identity, backing down feels like self-destruction. Even when logic says stop, ego says continue. And the internet rewards ego. That's why so many conflicts don't end when they should. They end when something external forces them to end. Law enforcement, court orders, or tragedy. 8. This is the moment that matters. Right now, this situation is at a fork. One path leads to disengagement, silence, legal counsel, private resolution. The other leads to escalation. More videos, more taunts, more audience pressure. Only one of those paths ends without permanent consequences. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If something violent happens, the internet will not frame it as, "We encourage this." It will frame it as, "He was crazy. She went too far." Responsibility will be individualized, but the pressure that helped create the moment will vanish from the story. That's how these things always go. So this isn't about picking sides. It's about recognizing a pattern before it finishes playing out. Because right now, stopping matters more than winning. At this stage, the most dangerous thing about this feud is not anger. It's momentum. Because once an online conflict reaches a certain intensity, stopping no longer feels like an option, even when everyone involved knows it should stop. That's where this is now. And to understand why, we have to move away from personalities and into psychology. Because what you're watching is not random chaos. It's a predictable escalation pattern that has played out in countless internet conflicts, some of which ended in courtrooms, some in cemeteries. Let's break down why walking away feels impossible once a feud hits this phase. The point of no return. Public identity lock-in. Early in a conflict, people argue about issues. Later, they argue about identity. By now, this feud is no longer about DL culture, ethics, or commentary. It's about who is real, who is scared, who is lying, and who controls the narrative. When T.S. Madison speaks, she is not just defending a position. She is defending a public identity built over years, strength, confidence, authority, success. When D.L. Whisperer speaks, he is not just responding to criticism. He is defending the very foundation of his platform: credibility, fearlessness, and relevance. At this point, backing down feels like erasing yourself. That's the psychological lock-in. Once your audience ties who you are to how you behave in the feud, stopping looks like surrender, not maturity. The audience as an invisible opponent. Here's something most people miss. Creators are not arguing with each other anymore. They are arguing with their audience's expectations. Every pause gets interpreted. Every silence becomes a loss. Every attempt at de-escalation gets reframed as fear. Comments don't just react, they instruct. Don't let her punk you. Stand on it. If you were really about it, You'd pull up. These messages are subtle, but constant. And over time, they rewire decision-making. The creator stops asking, "What is safe?" and starts asking, "What will my audience respect?" That shift is deadly, because audiences don't carry consequences. Creators do. Masculinity, power, and the refusal to yield. There is another layer here that makes this particularly volatile. Masculinity politics. DL Whisperer's entire brand is built around exposing men he claims are secretly gay while presenting as straight. That already places masculinity, dominance, and shame at the center of his content. So when he is challenged, especially by a powerful transgender woman, the conflict becomes symbolic. It's no longer, "You said something I don't like." It becomes, "You're challenging my authority, my masculinity, and my control." In that framework, backing down feels emasculating, even if the situation has nothing to do with actual gender or sexuality. This is how fights start over respect instead of facts, and respect-based conflicts escalate faster than any other type. Humiliation is a stronger driver than anger. People assume anger fuels violence. Often, it's humiliation. Public embarrassment triggers a deep threat response. It activates the same neurological systems associated with physical danger. The brain doesn't distinguish well between social annihilation and bodily harm. That's why things escalated after. Public taunts, mockery, doxing, location exposure. Those actions don't just insult, they corner. A cornered person doesn't think in long-term consequences. They think in immediate restoration of status. That's why logic stops working here. Telling someone this could end badly doesn't land when their nervous system is already in fight mode. The illusion of control. Another psychological trap at this stage is the belief that escalation is still controlled. Both sides likely believe, "I know what I'm doing. I won't actually cross the line. I can stop whenever I want." That belief is almost always wrong, because once weapons are referenced, homes are exposed, personal data is public, the situation is no longer fully in anyone's control. Third parties enter. Misinterpretations multiply. Fear escalates faster than intent. This is how "I was just talking" becomes "I didn't think it would go that far." Why logic fails in public feuds. Many people ask, why don't they just block each other? Why not log off? Because disengagement in private feels easy, but disengagement in public feels like loss. Public conflicts create a scoreboard. Who posted last? Who got more views? Who got the better clip? And when money, relevance, and pride are attached, logic loses. Especially when creators are rewarded financially for attention. Escalation becomes profitable until it isn't. The weaponization of self-defense language. Once threats feel real, people begin framing themselves defensively. Phrases like, "I'll protect myself," "I have the right to defend my home," "Don't try me." Legally, those statements are understandable. Psychologically, they harden positions. Because once you frame yourself as defending against a threat, the other person becomes the threat. Not a human, not a rival, but a danger. That framing makes extreme responses feel justified. And justified actions are the ones people regret most. Why this stage is the most dangerous. This is the stage where no one wants to be the first to stop. Everyone feels provoked. Audiences are egging it on. Stakes feel existential. And, importantly, Everyone thinks the other side will escalate first. That belief leads to preemptive thinking. I need to show I'm not scared. I need to draw a line. I need to prove something. Preemptive behavior is how situations explode. This is where most internet feuds end badly. History is not on their side. We've seen this pattern before. Online beef, location exposure, threats framed as jokes, weapons mentioned, someone pulls up, and after that, the story is no longer about who was right. It's about charges, court dates, sentences, trauma. The internet moves on. The people involved don't. The hard truth no one wants to hear. At this point, winning is no longer possible. There is no version of this where someone wins and walks away intact. There is only de-escalation or damage control, and the longer this continues, the smaller the de-escalation window becomes. Stopping now would not be cowardice. It would be survival, where this can still change. Despite everything, this is still a moment where choices matter. Not statements, not claps, not viral clips. Choices. Silence is a choice. Legal counsel is a choice. Disengagement is a choice. And yes, those choices come with temporary reputational hits. But reputations can recover. Criminal records don't. Why this needs to be said out loud? Because viewers often think escalation is entertaining, until it isn't. They don't see the panic behind the screen. They don't see the sleepless nights. They don't see how quickly fear replaces bravado. And by the time they do, it's too late. This isn't about sides. It's about recognizing a moment before it hardens into something irreversible. Because drama fades. Consequences don't. At this point, there is no version of this story that ends cleanly unless someone chooses restraint. Not apology as content. Not shade disguised as humor. Not one last post. Actual disengagement. Because once a conflict reaches this stage, with locations exposed, threats implied, weapons referenced, and audiences actively encouraging escalation, the margin for error is gone. This is where reality finally separates from entertainment. And this is where de-escalation stops being optional and starts being urgent. Let's talk plainly about what de-escalation actually means here. Not in theory, not in self-help language, but in real, practical terms. What de-escalation is and what it isn't. De-escalation is not pretending nothing happened. It's not laughing it off. It's not subtweeting or sarcastic victory laps. Real de-escalation looks boring, unprofitable, and unsatisfying to an audience, which is exactly why people avoid it. In this situation, de-escalation would mean no more mentions, direct or indirect. No more responding to clips, comments, or DMs. No more live streams about the conflict. No more receipts, warnings, or updates. No more location talk, ever. And yes, that includes resisting the urge to correct the record. Silence feels like losing, but silence is how control is regained. Why? Just one more response is the trap. Most people don't escalate because they want chaos. They escalate because they believe one more explanation will finally end it. That belief is false. In public feuds, explanations don't close loops. They reopen them. Every response creates new interpretations, new clips, new misquotes, new provocations, especially when the audience is emotionally invested. At this stage, clarity no longer comes from speaking. It only comes from stopping. Why legal reality has already entered the room. Here's the part people avoid acknowledging. Once homes are exposed, once weapons are referenced, once repeated invitations to fight are public, everything becomes evidentiary. Screenshots matter, videos matter, tone matters, timing matters, and none of that favors escalation. If something goes wrong, intent will be reconstructed from public behavior. Not how someone felt, but what they posted. Statements framed as jokes can be treated as threats. Pull-up language can be treated as provocation. Location exposure can be treated as intimidation. And audiences will not be in the courtroom explaining context. Only the people involved will be. Why audiences must be removed from the equation. As long as this conflict is public, it is not truly between two people. It is between two creators, plus tens of thousands of spectators, plus anonymous instigators, plus opportunists waiting for a viral moment. That is an impossible environment for resolution. No one can back down when they're being watched, which is why the first real step towards safety is removing the audience entirely. That doesn't mean announcing a break. It means disappearing from the conversation completely. No posts, no lives, no subtweets, no addressing, just absence. Why standing your ground is being misunderstood. There is a difference between legal self-defense and psychological escalation. Protecting your home is a right. Advertising that protection during a public feud is escalation. Once defensive language becomes performative, it stops being about safety and starts being about signaling. And signaling invites challenge. This is not about being weak. It's about not feeding the very conditions that create danger. True safety is quiet. Why accountability is not the same as punishment. A lot of people watching this want someone to be held accountable. But accountability doesn't always mean public consequences. Sometimes accountability means recognizing harm, ending harmful behavior, not repeating it, not escalating it. That's it. There is no requirement that accountability be dramatic, humiliating, or viral. In fact, the more dramatic it is, the less effective it tends to be. Why outing, doxing, and threat culture all fail the same way. Outing claims to protect people, but often exposes them to harm. Doxing claims to reveal truth, but removes safety. Threat culture claims to assert strength, but invites irreversible outcomes. All three rely on public pressure instead of resolution, and all three collapse once the law gets involved. No one wins those scenarios. They only survive them, sometimes barely. The role of power and the responsibility it creates. This part matters. T.S. Madison has immense reach, cultural influence, and visibility. With that comes power. And with power comes responsibility, whether fair or not. D.L. Whisperer has built a platform on exposure and confrontation. With that comes risk, especially when exposure turns personal. Neither of those realities excuses escalation. Both of them demand restraint, because when people with platforms collide publicly, the damage radius is larger than either individual intends. What happens if this continues? Let's be honest about the likely outcomes if nothing changes. Not hypotheticals. Patterns. Someone files a police report. Someone seeks a restraining order. Someone loses platform access. Someone faces criminal charges. Someone gets hurt. None of those outcomes lead to clarity. They lead to loss. And the internet will not remember who started it. It will only remember the ending. What the most responsible outcome looks like. The most responsible outcome here will look anticlimactic. No final speech. No dramatic reconciliation. No viral apology video. Just silence, distance, time. That's it. And yes, that will frustrate people who want closure. But safety matters more than closure. A final reality check. Internet feuds feel powerful until they aren't. They feel controlled until they aren't. They feel performative until they aren't. Every serious incident that started online has the same postmortem. I didn't think it would go that far. That sentence doesn't undo anything. The only way to avoid saying it later is to act before the point of no return. And that point is very close. The bottom line, this is no longer about ego. It's no longer about clout. It's no longer about who said what first. It's about preventing a situation where words turn into permanent consequences. De-escalation is not weakness. It is the only remaining form of control. And the hardest truth of all, the smartest move here will never trend. Do you think this situation can still be de-escalated, or has it already gone too far? One word in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.